January 12th, 2024, 6 a.m., went to play basketball with a group of friends. And I was actually showing off my left hand at that time because I hit 5 shots with my left hand. I didn't play particularly well, but I remember saying, "Oh, look how great my left hand is," and um, call it irony or ayin hara, whatever. Just a few hours later, my arm was paralyzed in that left hand. Well, what happened was after I played basketball, I went to play tennis with a good buddy of mine, and there was a puddle on the court on the left-hand side if you're facing your opponent. And so initially I was on the side without the puddle. It was 2-0, and I felt bad that I was, having the clear advantage. So we switched sides, and sure enough, it was 2-2. And 12-12, last point of the game, the ball just hovered towards the puddle, and I dove for it. I slipped like a person who would slip on a banana peel, fell backwards, and imagine the hand is in like a handcuff position, fell right on the humerus. I had to sustain then a mid-shaft humerus fracture. Right away, I could not feel my left hand. Right away, I was paralyzed from my left hand down. I could flex my fingers, but I couldn't extend it, and there was zinging pain throughout. So it was Martin Luther King Day, and the surgeon was on vacation. She was on a cruise, actually, and I called her up, but she wasn't able to operate, obviously, on that Friday. So I had to wait till Tuesday. There in the emergency room, you could see my bone jutting out of the arm over there. That's not my elbow. That's actually the bone, the humerus, split in half. There was a transverse fracture. That's right exactly where the radial nerve courses. So I was in the 10 to 15% of cases that have a radial nerve palsy associated with the humerus fracture. So my hand was like this. It happened again immediately. And typically it could last 3 months in typical cases. But as you'll see, my case lasted a much longer time. So in the emergency room, they put this special brace, Sarmiento brace, on me, and I just remember feeling the bones crunching against each other for the whole 4 days. It was just flat out torture. So Stephanie Shim operated on January 16th, and she found that the radial nerve was in fact entrapped between two bones, squished, and she was able to release it, but it was severely contused. It was unclear if the fascicles were no longer intact, but it was appearing continuous, which was a good sign. This happens in 1% of cases that the nerve is entrapped. So not only was I in the 10% of radial nerve palsy cases, now I'm in the 1% of those cases that the nerve is entrapped. So we would just have to wait and see if the nerve would recover. She put a huge plate to oppose the two bony fragments successfully, and then you can see the stitches and the sutures that accompanied the surgery. So I remember vividly two things that happened immediately post-op, which were beautiful yet not beautiful, depressing and yet beautiful. I don't know how to describe it otherwise, but I woke up. I had this sudden urge to urinate. I was all bruised up. It was not looking my best. And of course, there was the angelic nurse that was at bedside. She was extremely kind. I don't even remember. I'd never seen her before. And she said, "Can I get you anything?" I said, "Yeah, I need a urinal really bad." And as she brought it over, I just couldn't hold it back. It just things were gushing and whatever. I urinated all over her. And I remember, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was like, this day cannot get any worse. Swollen, pain, urinated all over a nurse. But then I felt a little taste in my mouth, and sure enough, it was pudding. My father trekked all the way from his office, and he's a little older now, and yet he did all this, and he walked over, and I remember thinking, oh my God, how lucky am I, even though I'm all bruised up and beaten up and in so much pain, how lucky am I to have a father like this? And I remember, so there was some good in the day that was marred by seemingly all badness. So just to understand, the radial nerve is the nerve that's responsible for allowing you to lift your wrist. It's extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis. Those are muscles that go like this, but it's also brachioradialis that hammers and your fingers extension too. So I didn't have any of that. Now, when you break the humerus and the radial nerve is damaged, now it takes 10 centimeters for you to have nerve growth in order to innervate that first muscle in the forearm. All the way in the arm, it got injured. So it has to grow about 1 millimeter a day, which is what it grows, and it has to go 10 centimeters, which is 100 millimeters, which is 100 days. So you have to wait 100 days, 3 months basically, or 3.5 months, in order to know if your nerve is actually alive. So imagine the amount of patience that very last thing to come every day. I looked at it and I woke up in the morning and I saw my hand and I was like, oh, come on, can you lift it? Imagine that for 3.5 months, 4 months until, thank God, finally it did it. But that was really, it was really a battle. As I dealt with the intense swelling, I also dealt with the reality that the nerve was 175 millimeters away from the brachioradialis. So 175 divided by 7, that this could take 25 weeks or 6 months for me actually to get that first pinch in the brachioradialis. That doesn't mean my arm's going to be back, but that means that I wouldn't know for 6 months if my nerve is functioning. For somebody as impatient as me, this is like the hardest type of injury, and that's why it was so difficult.
So here's my hand. Here's the hand. Still got the wrist drop, obviously.
Can you see it?
The rest of the hand looks.
Could
maybe
move the
I can
whole
see the rest
thing.
of the video. So here's my.
Here are a couple more examples of the disability, what it looked like. And on the top, you could see the timeline. Usually you get recovery by the 2 to 3 month mark. At least you could see some muscles working in the forearm. I saw absolutely nothing by 4 months. And I planned a trip to New York to get a high quality EMG and nerve conduction study. At that time, I was also thinking about the next steps, which were a nerve transfer and a tendon transfer, because it didn't look like my nerve was going to come back on its own. So I spent hours and hours and hours of time perseverating about whether or not I should get a nerve transfer or a tendon transfer. Basically, a nerve transfer would mean that I would take branches from the adjacent median nerve that would bypass the broken radial nerve and then innervate those muscles. The downside would be that I would have to wait a whole year or a year and a half to see if that would work. And I'm already impatient as it was. The tendon transfer is more of an end of the line technique where they take tendons that are innervated by the median nerve, and they take flexor muscles and they make them into extensor muscles. So when you feel like you're going, like right now, if I feel like I'm going to pronate, that muscle turns into the muscle that goes like this. So you have to retrain your hand. If you do tendon transfers, you have to retrain your brain, which takes 2 months, but it's a much faster process than the nerve transfer. So I was leaning towards a tendon transfer. The bottom line is I was going through what is my next option after about 4.5 months of just pure disability. So up to this point in my journey, basically everything was in a way negative in terms of the prognosis. I mean, of course, I can get my hand back or a semblance of it. It wouldn't be the same. It would be some sort of tendon transfer or nerve transfer. Things were looking bleak. And at this point in the story, I would like to now shift gears to the spiritual aspect and then go back to the physical aspect. So bear with me. And this is the most important part in terms of why I wanted to tell the story. About 1 week before my injury, I was asked by Rabbi Yaakov Garfinkel to speak to the boys at the Lubavitch Educational Center, about 50 or 100 kids, on the Maimonides Day. And I decided to speak about the bracha, the prayer of Asher Yatzar, the prayer that we make when we come back out of the bathroom, when we're done, thanking God for the holes and the tubes that work to somehow keep us alive. And I ended off with a question, an open-ended question. And I said, why do we say, blessed is God, the healer of all flesh, who does wonders? Umafli lasot. The word umafli lasot is not seen anywhere. Like, where do you see this? And wonders he shall continue to make. Like, it's a weird word. You should say the oseniflaut, and that he makes wonders. Like, what is this wording? Umafli, and he does wonders, or he's wondrously laasot, to do. It's like very odd. So I left it as an open-ended question for these 50, 100 kids. I didn't answer it, and I just, it was a moment of silence, and I think the kids thought I was crazy, and that's how the talk ended. I had, of course, an answer. So Mafli Lasot, this is sort of novel, but the only other time we see the wording Mafli Lasot is when it talks about it in Judges 13/19. Manoach was not able to have a child. His wife was barren. His child ended up being Samson, the great warrior. But God opened up her womb, and that was a miracle. But he didn't have a fire to offer a sacrifice to God to say thank you. So a malach came by, picked up a rock, and from the rock came a fire. And the Manoach and his wife looked on and was like amazed. What's the point? What does that have to do with, first of all, Manoach and his wife? And certainly, what does that have to do with Asher Yatzar? Why would it show up? So what? Mafli Lasot in Asher Yatzar. Because what's the point here by the story of Manoach and his wife? God is showing them the beauty of childbirth. Childbirth, the fact that a tube from the man and a tube from the lady have to align, and that the fertilized egg has to go to the fallopian tube and end up in the endometrium and somehow come out a baby, that is a miracle, just like fire coming from a rock. That's the point why we say mafli lasod and asher yotzer, because we're thanking God, hey, I went to the bathroom and all my tubes are like, somehow my intestines worked, my stomach, my small intestine, the large intestine, the colon, somehow it all worked. But guess what? Mafli lasod, the fact that I'm even alive to begin with is a huge miracle. And I think that's the beautiful lesson of mafli lasod. Of course, that was very difficult to say to 50 to 100 Lubavitch kids, but I had that in mind as I said that Dvar Torah, and you'll see how that is relevant coming up. So what does this whole talk about Asher Yatzar, speaking to kids, Lubavitch, all this have to do with my injury? Like, what's going on? Maflila. So, like, okay. So here's the deal. About 4 or 5 weeks after my injury, I saw a Lubavitch nurse, a girl on the seventh floor, a lady who is a great nurse, and she saw that I was struggling with my left hand. She said, "Hey, what can I do for you?" I said, "Please pray for me." So they have a custom. Lubavitch, a lot of Lubavitch have a custom that when they're looking for a skula or a prayer, they put in a sheet of paper into a set of books that were written by Lubavitcher Rebbe as a response to people who asked him random questions in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. People asked him questions like, "Oh, I have a sickness, or I have this business venture," and he would answer their letters. It was letters. So, so people would just put in, with their name, they would put in a note, and then they'd open it up, and that would correspond potentially to what their issue was. So I'm not usually a believer in these things, so I said, okay, whatever, you could do what you want, thank you. She did it for her husband. She was doing some note for her husband. I guess he had some medical issue, whatever it was, and then she opened up the page and then she noticed that it said Yehuda Aryeh on the next page over, and it said something about refuah shlema. So she thought, oh my God, maybe that's a good sign. I was thinking about ariciment too. And so she printed out this letter. That's all she knew. All she saw was Yehuda Aryeh. My name's Ari Yehuda. And she saw maybe refuah shlema. She thought maybe that's related. That's all she knew. So she sends me this letter a couple of days later after I asked her to pray for me. And so I started reading the letter. And let me read it together. So remember, all she saw was Yehuda Aryeh. My name is Aryeh Yehuda. And refuah shlema, she thought she saw somewhere in there. So let's read it. It says, Baruch Hashem, Aleph Shvat, okay, the first of Shvat, Tufshin Yud Beis, 1952, Brooklyn. This is the time the letter was written. Okay, my injury happened on Beis Shvat, the second day of Shvat. I mean, this happened to be written literally the day before my injury, and 74 years earlier. Okay, that's cool. Okay, it would have been even cooler if it was Beis Shvat, but that's pretty close, right? Right, one day, fine. And then it says Yehuda Aryeh. It says it's regarding Yehuda Aryeh. My name is Aryeh Yehuda. That's pretty cool. Shalom ubracha. Hi. It says, "Benom kibalti mechtavo." I see that you have. I'm going to say it in English. I see that you're somewhat better from what you were before, and I hope that you'll start to slowly get better. And my hope is there because Hashem Yisbarach, God, is Rofei Kol Basar Umafli La'asot. God is somebody who heals all flesh and performs wonders. Wow. Okay, so now I'm thinking, what are the chances? Okay, it says Yehuda Aryeh, it's Aleph Shvat, and then it also says right out of Asher Yatzar that God should heal you just because He is the healer of all flesh and performs wonders. But believe it or not, it gets even better because he goes on, according to Chazal, who is a wise person? Somebody who sees the future. Ezehu hachacham haroa es hanolad. That's the standard interpretation of haroa es hanolad. But he explains, what's the real, but the Perush Torah Chasidus, the Chasidim, like, Lubavitch, say, haroa es holed es habria me ayin layesh, sheroa ze b'chol etu v'chol rega. Who is a wise person? Not hanolad, what's going to be in the future, but hanolad is something that is given birth. Meaning, if you're able to see godliness in a newborn creature where something comes from nothing, that is true wisdom. Now, put this all together. I had explained maflila so to mean how wondrous it is from creating something from nothing. And this is exactly the theme, exactly verbatim of this letter from the Lubavitcher Rebbe to a Yehuda Aryeh on Aleph Shvat in 1952. And basically, he goes on and says that, you know, if you have an injury, it corresponds to something that you're missing. You're missing the emuna, the belief that really something can be created from nothing. I think, the muster that I got is, wow, maybe I didn't have full emuna or belief that something can be created from nothing. You have to have belief that things can happen against all odds. And it's incredible. To me, this gave me tremendous hope that something can come from nothing. This sort of connection to the Asher Yatzar gave me like a little spiritual renaissance in the sense that I thought, like, wow, maybe there was some bigger picture from the Ayin Layesh. It's a great lesson, and I sought other brachas from like the Biala Rebbe, my father, my brother, my wife, Isaac Gorin, David Hirschhorn, the Korfs. People would send me messages every day saying they're praying for me. I really appreciated every single prayer. I know you prayed for me, and I really appreciate it because I really did need it.
Just say that ariciment does so much for so many people, and he's a board member of United Hatzalah, and he's going through surgery today. Now, he was supposed to be here in this board meeting, and he's here in New York. He went through a very bad accident that he's suffering a lot. It wasn't in Gaza. It was in a tennis game in Miami, but he went through a terrible situation that he had to go through multiple surgeries, and he's in New York, but he still, while he was suffering, he was helping whatever he could to help Paul, and we wish him a refuah shalema to ariciment.
So, in case you weren't sold on this Lubavitch connection somehow, on the way in to New York to get an opinion after 4 months of paralysis, it was a month longer than expected, at least to get any inkling that the nerve is there. I'm on a subway going into New York City. Actually, it's a Long Island Railroad, and I get a text message early in the morning from Yaakov Garfunkel. He doesn't usually text me, and he was telling me about some sort of shear, and then I wrote back to him, "Oh, I'm in New York." He said, "Oh, you should go to the Ohel." So I googled where the Ohel was, and you could see 8:14 a.m. I was literally right next door from I was on the LARR. It was bypassing the Ohel, like literally right there. Again, a sign there was some sort of connection. You'll see the report that I got from the HSS, Hospital Special Surgery EMG nerve conduction study, was actually a positive one. So, like I said, after all these months of nothingness, I have an hour-long torture chamber EMG nerve conduction study. Dr. Feinberg does it in about, he's telling me every step of the way what's going on. About 50 minutes of negativity, everything's dead as a doornail. And the last 5 minutes, he says, "You know what? I see some faint axonal regeneration. I see something in your brachioradialis, a signal that maybe it's coming back." And he stopped the test and he said, "I think you're going to have a recovery." He was certain that I'm going to have a recovery, even though he said it was a tiny bit of electrical activity he detected in the brachioradialis. So this was the first good news that I heard in all these months. The first two people I called to tell was Mark Sokolowski, my best friend from medical school, who I spoke to. He literally texted me every single day for 6 months. And Andrew Lovey, a surgeon who did a pin decompression surgery on me and just was also there with me from the very beginning in terms of the nerve injury. It was really incredible. Tremendous amount of Hakaras Hatov, and thanks to both of them. Despite that good news, I had to wait because I still didn't know it. Nothing was there. It was like literally may ayin layesh, from nothing to something. You don't see anything, and all this time I'm still struggling mentally and physically because you have no function of that left hand, and not only that, it's all atrophying and turning into nothing. And sure enough, the brachial radialis did start firing right after Passover, And really, May 1st, I was sure that the brachial radialis was firing, but I still wasn't sure if my wrist was going to work, especially because one of the neurologists felt like I always had a little bit of brachial radialis and my other nerves were not guaranteed to recover. So I was still not out of the woods, but certainly I was happier than I was before.
I mean, it's exactly 16 weeks.
Robust brachial radialis. Now, when I lift my hand,
Exactly 16 weeks.
nothing happens. So from January 15th, no, from January 13th until June 1st, imagine waking up every single morning, looking at your hand like this, and hoping that you could see this, you know? And June 1st was that day where all of a sudden, I'm wearing the same shirt actually. June 1st, I saw this for the first time, and I said, wow, now that's a sign that I'm going to have a recovery. So June 1st was what I would say the liberation day in terms of the arm. So, of course, there's always has to be some drama down the road, and the nerve distal to those muscles got a little bigger, and there was a concern that maybe there's a compression from the muscles, and so I did need urgent surgery that was performed by Dr. Andrew Lovey, and he released the nerve that might have been compressed, allowing me to have a healing of the nerve further down. So here's a picture of that second surgery that I had in July 3rd. Again, that was just to take care of this swollen pin, which would have potentially not enabled my fingers to work. So I definitely knew that it wasn't enough to have a wrist if you can't extend your fingers. So that's essentially why we needed to rule that pin decompression out, because on the ultrasound, the nerve was really looking big and inflamed at that level. It's not fully clear if I needed that second surgery, although I believe I really did. And Dr. Lovey was incredible. And within a few weeks, I started getting symmetric wrist motion and started very gently getting something in the fingers. The fingers really started coming back in July. This is my left hand, by the way. In July, I was able finally to extend the fingers, although they're still not so strong, but definitely better than they were.
Here's my hand.
August 4th.
You could see the hand.
My wrist. I could lift up the hand.
Pretty much
could
new thing over the last
I'm going to go like
a little
this,
bit, month and a half.
The first two fingers.
Pretty central. I don't have my thumb yet. I'm able to do bronchoscopies.
And but I can lift up the wrist. There's
Here's
the
my left
thumb.
hand.
You can see I wasn't able to lift it off the table. That's the most I can get with the thumb
So here's my left hand.
right now.
Number
The
27.
index, see, I can do that on the table.
Mid-October, my thumb started working, and that's after 10 months, I realized, you know what, I could play basketball again. I never thought I would play basketball again, so that was awesome. And I went out, took the kids to the movies, and I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning and shot some hoops. A little cool subplot is my nephews both served in the IDF. Davey, the one with the beard, was in San Khanim, and he was over 250 plus days, like in a row in Gaza. And my other nephew was in Hebron serving the IDF, along with other nephews. But those two were incredible, and they happened to be coming to Miami. And I promised them, I said, hey, you know what? If my arm gets better, one day we're going to, no matter what, we're going to the floor of an NBA game. That's how we're going to celebrate you getting out of Gaza and Hebron, and I, getting my arm back. It would be, it would be something to celebrate. And so I asked Gabe if we can go to the Hornets game, and he was like, hell yeah. And it was incredible. It was probably one of the best days ever. Just had a great time. And for me, it was sort of like things gone full circle in terms of the healing process. I had a very painful injury. I hurt myself. I wasn't defending the nation of Israel. I was defending a tennis game. But nevertheless, it was very painful, and it was a hard time. But I learned the lesson of Me'ayin Layesh, that things can come from nothing, that God can help you in ways that you wouldn't think are possible. And I learned the lesson, Baruch Atah Hashem, Rofech Kol Basar, Umafli La'asot.